6-part series on Polyplexus called The Art and Science of Systems Thinking. And if those of you who are new to Polyplexus, it's an extraordinary collective of researchers and policymakers and funders in an interdisciplinary community to kick the tires on some of the world's biggest ideas and cutting edge research. And the purpose of this particular series that I've been leading is to level set and form a glossary around the jargon, the over-jargonized field of systems thinking as a practice, and to attempt to expand the Venn diagram, if you will, of disciplines that have useful approaches to complex problem solving. Right? I often ask in this series, whose point of view do you want in your lifeboat? And that's a little loaded and a little bit of a cheat, but the thing that I care about in that question is how to actually solve things, as opposed to how we should, or what the nice way, or the this, like what are useful ways to look at very difficult problems. And one of them is systems thinking. And many disciplines, many fields, many cultures have kind of extraordinary approaches that are holistic or integrative or systems, where they look at the entirety of a landscape to understand what's going on and how to intervene. So over the last 6 months, we've done this series of incubators, which you can find. All of the past incubators and discussion threads are on polyplexus.com. But the effort has been to begin a conversation. It's just a beginning around how do we come together. Well, it's not even the you shoulds. It's the where are the tools? If you wanted to rapid prototype the world, how would you do it? What resources would you go to? Whose point of view would you employ in your rapid prototyping? Right? What is uniquely holistic in indigenous cultures in terms of complex problem solvings and self-governance? Same with, right? So within the sciences in the Western world, there's a heavy emphasis on formal systems thinking, complexity science, game theory, even design thinking and synergetics. But in my experience, it tends to neglect other fields that I feel are really useful, from diplomacy, multinationals, which we'll talk about today, and ecology, for example. And those are just some. So in the spirit of continuing to expand the Venn diagram, please welcome my co-host today and longtime dear friend, Chris Luebkeman, who is a strategist and a futurist and an executive, long history in multinationals of different shapes and sizes, and he can talk about that in a second. But I've asked Chris here specifically to help us have a conversation about the role and the unique capacity of global/multinational organizations to be part of systems challenge solutions. So we'll start out. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Laura.
Am I right, or am I overstating that the global or multinational organizations, and for right now, we'll leave them in a lump. I understand they're quite different in flavor, have a unique potential to both understand and analyze and intervene in not just grand challenges, but complex systems challenges.
So, Laura, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to see you. Great to see you. Great to be here with you and your team to help make this happen this morning, this afternoon, this evening, depending on where you are in the world. I happen to be at this moment sitting in Zurich, in Switzerland, and this is, as you very well know, the home of many multinational organizations, as many international businesses. I'm not here in that role, but I'm here at the university, at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology right now, and the Office of the President, heading up a group called Strategic Foresight. Now, before that, I was 20 years at a global consultancy, a global engineering, design services, professional services company called Arup. And that firm, when I left, had around 13,000 people in somewhere around 50 something offices in 40 countries.
Mhm.
And so I had the boon and the bane of traveling to most of those offices on a regular basis. I was one of those who killed the planet through my aviation emissions. And so I was traveling 2 to 3 weeks a month to go visit them. And it was quite interesting to see how knowledge moved and how information moved between these offices,
Mhm.
and how place-based solutions and place-based context could shape those solutions.
Mhm.
And so we'll come back to that in just a second, because I do want to answer your question. Do I believe that multinationals or global companies have a role to play in solving many of the challenges which we as humans have placed before us? The answer is unequivocally yes. If we take a look at the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs, one of those is unusual partnerships. And a thing that I really respect, that the SDGs embrace the fact that business and multinational organizations have a role to play, that they're not just negative forces. They're not just forces for evil, and some can be, but there also can be forces, benevolent forces and benevolent opportunities. The Millennium Development Goals kind of looked at business as the bad girl, bad boy, and the SDGs have embraced this opportunity that multinationals play. And to me, one of the roles that they can play is this transference of knowledge at a pragmatic level. There's lots of transference of knowledge at an intellectual level, and have been for many years through academic and research institutions. But at the end of the day, what we need to be able to do is to bring many of these solutions, many of these ideas to ground. And this is where I believe that this combination, this unusual partnership of business and civil society and academia can work together, especially with multinationals, where you can share that, you can flip it over something to the other side and see, can we use it here? Or what's the context? Or the opposite, where an office, say, in Lagos can say, hey, this is how we're solving something here. These are some of the challenges we're having here. Does anybody inside the company know what we should need to be able to do? And it's quite
experience, because I know you and I know some of your history, I know that you have brought systems thinking and foresight to things that you do. But would you say that many multinational organizations actively think of themselves as systems players?
That's a really good question. And do I think that they actively consider that? They talk about that at a board meeting? Probably the answer is no. Right? Because most boards, most executive boards or management boards are not thinking of themselves as a system, but they're really, depending on where they're based, they're thinking about this year's profits and losses and what they need to be doing to get through. But one thing I do believe is that the recognition that systems thinking is a critical part of business success is increasing.
Okay.
That I'm convinced of. And I'll give you an example from my previous firm. It was a bunch of engineers, and they, under the leadership of one individual, took the water business and said, we need to look at the water cycle, no longer look at water acquisition, water transference, and water purification, but it's all water. So let's look at this as a system. And oh yeah, by the way, when you're looking at water acquisition, there's also an ecosystem which has to do with how you acquire that water and then how you clean it And so then, there became this incredible epiphany of, if we look at this as a system, we get a much broader perspective in how one part is helping or hindering the next, rather than each one being in their own little world of, blue, green, gray, or black. And right. And I say I'm being perhaps unfair to my former colleagues, but what was really interesting to me is some of the initial resistance because of professional domains started to relax when you realized, I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm trying to expand what we can do. So systems thinking means to go, it's sort of implying you need to go from me to we, right? You got lots of me's and they accumulate into we, right? And that began then to unlock business opportunity. Because then, in talking to some of the more enlightened clients, they got much more than they were asking for, because it was much easier for us to talk and dialogue around the system and that piece within the system to help the client understand not just their piece, but everything that's going around it as well, and how all these other things kind of hinge into it. Right? And that, to me, that was really important. And one last little thing I know you want to say. So the other thing that I find so very interesting is very often, if you look back over the professional domains, the guilds created a language which was unique to their guild in order to keep others out. Right? And this whole guild mentality sort of was transferred over hundreds of years. And this became then also the license to operate. If you understand the language, then you have the license to operate. And this is part of the, like I'll say, the professional engineering exam, the architectural exam, all these different exams allow you to understand the language. Do you prove that you know the language? But what the dirty secret was, well, lots of that language separates what should be a logical systemic collaboration, right? Right. And this is a critical thing for me when we're looking at breaking the barriers into systems thinking, is understanding that very often we're just the systems thinking is hindered by language. And so one of the first things we need to be doing is talking about trying to get over our separation of language. I'm not trying to get rid of professional engineering or professional whatever's at all, but it's actually saying, when I talk about a wall, I don't necessarily have the right and you the wrong. We have to come back to what do you understand is important about a wall? What do I understand is important about a wall? And how do we look at this as a system which is part of a whole thing? And so that's the other thing I just want to say, is just like this idea of the language as a divider and the language as a unifier when it comes to systems.
Well, you're speaking my language, so to speak. I mean, really the whole reason that we set out to do this and break it into a series of incubators was to have the conversation, to at least frame up for an audience the need. I call it the Rosetta Stone or the decoder ring of the jargon of the particular language of different fields, who honestly are saying the same things. Emergence is a great term and a more used term than others, and yet there are 8 or 10 other words or phrases that connote the same thing that folks searching or discussing among themselves would use versus emergence, and they'll never cross paths unless we help them cross paths. And so I'm glad that you're going to help me fill out this open source.
Well, we'll try.
Live out there in the sky, and is meant for everybody.
So let me just say one of the things that, coming back to your original question, I don't believe in boardrooms. As I said before, I don't believe that your chairwoman is going to say, okay, what's our systems thinking dialogue today?
Right.
Right.
Darn.
Let's talk about systems.
Right.
Everyone's going to look at you. You're talking about our financial system, our HR system. What system are you talking about? Right. But I truly do believe, I come back to it, is there is increasing recognition of the interconnectivity.
Mhm.
And I think COVID has helped many companies see this, which they didn't see before, is the interconnectivity and the fragility of the system within which they are placed. And the systems upon which they depend, which were never in a way revealed before. So that the openness and the opportunity to talk about the systems thinking and the place within the system have ratcheted up by about 200%, right? And through this awareness. So I think now is the perfect time to help businesses and multinationals understand where they're, reveal their roles and
How long
engage.
do you think that openness will last? What will the reflex, what, do you have any sense of, I mean, my hope, of course, my hope for the world is that there's enough of a percentage of funding and corporate think tanks and, you know, groupings that commit to an interdisciplinary global approach to at least looking at consequences, intended and otherwise, and interconnectedness when they think things through. But I suspect that shareholder pressure and, you know, other extranational events will loom front and center sooner than later. So how long do we have?
Yes, that's the billion-dollar question, right?
Right.
So there's yes, right. I think there's three parts to the answer, Laura. Because really the question you're asking is how sticky, what's the stickiness of the consciousness of our interdependence? Right? How sticky is that? And I think it depends upon where one sat or stood in the value chain. I would suggest all those who sit to work or sat to work will be less conscious of it and will probably not be as sticky as those who stood to work. Because those who stood to work and who are standing to work are very aware of the fragility of what they've just gone through. You know, and I'm sitting right now and I sit to work. I sit in front of a laptop and I can take my laptop with me. But the cook at my favorite corner restaurant, little family-run restaurant, which has been closed off and on for a year, the cook there, he stands to work. And he's been out of a job every once in a while. So he's very aware of interdependencies. So that's one answer. The second part is, I think it also depends on the supply chain which one has had. I think there are those, this is coming to there are those whose supply chain was already very clear. And those who were in manufacturing or light or heavy who are very aware of their supply chain, and those who were not, right? And it's not just the primary, but it's the secondary and tertiary parts and supplies, which sometimes could stop an entire line or entire production process. And I think those who have been part of that will be much more aware longer. And the third is going to be those groups who are in charge of defining risk for any multinational, any company. Because they now have a whole new section, which I'm sure they've really fleshed out their risk register in a way which I don't think 2 years ago they would have had. And if you're sitting having a conversation around risk, I believe that systemic risk has now taken on a more important dialogue, especially for multinationals. And I can't confirm that because at the moment I'm not in any boardrooms, but that's my gut would say this is something which is definitely on the table. And also an area of research saying, okay, so really, what is the systemic risk, right? From a standpoint, from a multinational. I mean, if you can get it for, so you pay 0.5% more for something that comes locally. What's the risk? I mean, this is interesting. How do we redefine this risk, this rediscovery of suppliers who are within a much closer distance? Because we became addicted to cheap and simple travel or cheap and simple supply chains. So I kind of went way off topic there. Sorry, Laura. That's all right. Excuse me.
No, what I'm looking for is your help for insights into the process and the thinking, right? Again, we both agree that we're not weighing in on the you shoulds of anybody at the moment. That's a conversation for a glass of wine another time. But so putting even stewardship and putting aside even the growing group of companies at all scales that are weighing in and making sustainable development goal commitments, for example. Those are companies that have made a specific and robust corporate social responsibility or moral position based on for their own reasons, right? And including the you shoulds. But what I'm interested in today is what can these kinds of organizations, or what are some of the things you've mentioned knowledge transfer, which I want to go into a little more later, but what else what are best practices? And again, I'm lumping them in a group, and you're free to break up that group, right? The Red Cross is not the same as SAP, which is not the same as ERIC. But what are some schemas, if you will, for this toolkit that we can learn from? And really interested in the best practices of because these kinds of organizations have done some things effectively at scale, whereas many other interventions or many other folks are not very good at scale. Lots of good ideas out there. You and I would talk a lot about good ideas, but really bad at scaling them, whereas these organizations tend to be pretty good at it.
So I haven't really studied this, Laura, so this is Chris's view. Right, some of these I could a little more direct, but to me very often, first of all, I believe much more in donkeys than unicorns. The world has become obsessed with unicorns, right?
True.
And this is so that everyone talks about unicorns and scaling and all this, and I'm saying, actually, even Napoleon crossed the Alps on a donkey, right? Donkeys have built the world, and donkeys are steady. They are hardworking. You treat them well, they'll treat you with a lifetime. A unicorn is a fictitious animal that's only a figment of our imagination. And I really like donkeys. And we need imagination, yes, but searching for a unicorn, you can search your whole life. But we need more donkeys. And donkeys is how we're going to, more donkeys, local donkeys, is how we're going to actually make change happen. Not searching for the unicorn, right? And I know this is a bit heresy for someone who's sitting in the West Coast of the United States at the moment. Right. But this is truly, I believe, and I think our fascination with the unicorn is taking us from the work that needs to be done. And again, donkeys are workers, right? They're. So, and how do some of these companies really make it work? Because they make it relevant to local communities, right? I know at ERIC, we focused on water for a couple of years. And the reason it was successful, this effort around water it wasn't saying thou shalt, but it's like, let's learn together. Let's focus on what's relevant for you. And so you're able to work with our employees' passions and interests. And some offices weren't all that interested in it, frankly. But for example, Hong Kong really looked at what was going on in the harbor in Cape Town. The office there was looking at what was happening in the base of the pyramids camps. LA looked at other things. So you have to me, what they do is they pick a topic which is relevant to the world, and then they make it, and so it's just important to the world, and they allow it to happen at a local level. What fails is when you turn around and say, thou shalt, right? Now, thou shalt do this. Because for us, I know some of our offices were being very successful, others were struggling. And to say to either a successful office from a financial standpoint or financially struggling office, to say thou shalt never works.
But okay, all right. So, but let's talk about the. So, I think there's famous stories in particular in the extraction industries of having, I think Shell is credited with the scenario, the far out scenario planning, right? So it's understandable as that they're global. They were global before the other before everybody else was, but Shell has a famous planning scenario. Sure. How are other companies, not just the future, not just, but the looking, right? So for Arup, I don't know what you can say about Arup, but what tools? How did they even make that? How did they even get there?
Yeah. Okay. So if we want to move into sort of how we think about this is also systems thinking, is what is the future going to look like? Right, and this is where I play. Now you're coming back into my garden.
Okay, good.
Right. So, many groups will say the future will be. I believe, and many also believe, that the future is a story which we can co-author. Right, and either case, as a business, you hope that you're going to be successful. You plan on being successful, whatever success means. And I would say no matter what. Right. And so therefore, one in a business, multinational, global, needs to be thinking about what's driving change, what could be, so that you're prepared for what will be. And this is looking at the big system, which is our planet, right? Spaceship Earth, as Bucky's would say, call it. And some companies are like, look, we react, we're fine. We're going to be good. We've got great people. And others going to go, oh, wow, yeah, you're right. Especially those global companies who have a global reach, who are impacted by trends or demographic shifts in Indonesia, Nigeria, Chile, Argentina, China, United States, Canada. You pick it, like those who have a reach, they understand that despite the fact that there's perhaps Google everywhere, our markets and how we move around are very, very different. Despite the fact that the atmosphere flips around everywhere and it knows no boundaries, we still have very different climate laws depending on each country. And so how do we think about the future, right? And this is, for me, really interesting. Now, you quoted Shell, and Shell is famous for their scenarios. They used to use, two critical axes. What do you think are the most unknown and most impactful factors when you look into the future? They then went to trilemmas, and they had all sorts of different ways. But essentially, you're trying to make sense. It's a sense making of our global system using different lenses. That was really the critical thing. And there's lots of tools for doing this, ranging from scenarios, and you can do word gaming, backcasting, wind tunneling. There's all sorts of names for all sorts of methods, which.
But I'm going to pin you on that, because
Okay.
we can assemble that classic list,
Mhm.
and we'll add to it.
Sure.
I want to know, what are ones you've seen in with clients, with government, with out in the world, that don't use those terms, but use some version.
Yep.
Like what has worked? What are you seeing out in the real world?
Yeah. So, okay, the real world. Yeah. So,
World.
well, yeah. So, okay, you're not going to like my answer, Laura.
It's all right.
But it depends. It
Right.
depends. It depends on the cultural context. It depends on what is expected, what is desired, what is hoped for. It depends upon who needs to hear what, how.
Okay, but what have you seen that we could describe, and perhaps diagram, and then break out the terms, so that it is useful for somebody else coming along and finding that toolkit? So it's not prescriptive, it's simply understanding, they approached understanding what was going on in their region, their whatever, their system, this way, and I hadn't seen that before. So the knowledge transfer isn't just wow, I was in that cool room with that great team. It's like they approached it in another way, or they applied X. That's what I'm looking to pull some of that.
So you want a unicorn? You want a unicorn?
No, I don't want a unicorn. I want a GitHub for systems tools, right? I want a set of things that, I feel like tick, 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 planetary things. What are things that folks can try? What can countries, and even at scale, try? Yes, I agree that it depends. Of course it depends, but there is no one answer. That's part of what we're learning, right? We need to throw many things at the wall and so what are some things you've seen that aren't classic shell tools, aren't classic right? That's where I'm trying to get to.
Okay, so I'm hearing my own voice now. So what am I saying? They're not classic tools. So most everything. So scenarios is essentially storytelling.
Okay.
Right. And so you're saying, so Chris, what's better than storytelling? Or what have you seen as, and to me, the goal is always trying to be to help create a story which allows the audience, or whoever the goal is, to reveal, to unfold, to unlock the lessons which we're trying to unearth. And the lessons I put in quotes, because it's not like wagging your finger like a teacher up front. Is, in a way, you're a futures therapist. And trying to say, okay, most everyone has an idea about what they believe the future is, and where they believe the future is going. So to me, the role that one has to play is to be a friendly challenger of that preconceived notion of normal, to allow one to see that there is really no such thing as normal.
So maybe a better way to frame my question is, let's take storytelling scenarios as so what are some effective prompts? What have you seen that are some maybe unexpected prompts that help a system develop develop and co-author the story?
Okay. So unexpected is for me hard to know what to say, and per se, because after doing this for so long, it's like going, okay, these are just things we just sort of do, taking magazines and taking. All right, so here's one that I think is always interesting. I'm trying to think, Laura, how to give you an answer which will make you happy, right? So this is good. This is a harder one. Let me just hold on to it. So I believe that everyone has a lens through which they view. Right? And this comes back to the systems part. I'm trying to link these two with the future. And what I try to do is I always, and this is classic within scenarios, it's using STEEP or steeple, where you're using society, technology, environment, economy, politics, and law, legal, that these lenses, that we make sure that we always are having a conversation which incorporates all 5/6 of those lenses. And very often, a group will get really wound up about 2 of those or 3. On most board meetings I've sat in, you usually you talk about the economics, and then you kind of talk a little bit. You talk about people and projects, right? But you don't really have a robust conversation where you're really kind of thinking, did we talk about all 6 of these things, right? So that's one tool. And again, this is classic in scenario work. I mean, this is just looking at drivers work. So, but I believe in this deeply. And I know in my personal experience, I first started doing this, I didn't really talk about politics or legal or environment. I was a professor at MIT, trying to think about the home of the future and how to help people age gracefully at home with technology. So I did S and I did T, and I'm just an environmentalist at heart. So I did one of the E's. The other 3 I just kind of left to the side. Didn't even think about legal implications, just like whatever. But then when I joined the corporate world with the multinational, that was one of the first things that said, if we don't have rules which allow us to execute, all the other cool stuff doesn't matter. So you need to focus on the laws. If you don't have the laws and have a framework, you can have all the tea and the desire you want. It doesn't matter.
That's really helpful. And it did make me happy. Hang on.
Good. Phew.
I'm going to read I'm going to read out a question from the chat threads from Terry.
Sure.
Quote, cheap, fast, market financeable, globally applicable options offer the most effective, yet most underestimated and overlooked solutions for climate, proliferation, and poverty. What do you think of that quote?
I have to confess, I've called it up because there's so many adjectives there. Cheap, fast, market financeable, globally applicable options offer the most effective. I'm sure there's a context to this, which it sounds like someone who has an answer already waiting for the question. And
Well,
to me in business, we always said you can have cheap, you can have fast, and you can have high quality. Which of the 2? Which 2 of those 3 do you want? Mm-hmm. You can't have all 3. Mm-hmm. And I kind of, I wouldn't say it's always the case, but I think 8 times out of 10, that's very, and globally applicable, I'm not sure about that, right? But again, it depends on exactly the domain we're talking about. I think one of the things that we forget is there's bioclimatic and cultural differentiation. If you're in Singapore and you're in Anchorage, Alaska, those are 2 very different worlds. In one place you have, Singapore, you have sun pretty much year round. In Alaska or further north in Canada, you lose the sun for months at a time or hours. So you barely see any sun. So there's a contextual piece to this that is, to me, is really missing, to be able to really respond to that. So, yeah.
So I know the subject of cities is near and dear to you, and we have
very much so.
We started a discussion thread on Polyplexus, and so I'll just read it out for folks from the thread. Why are cities both our future and our failure? What can / should, we'll try to steer clear a little bit of the should, multinationals in particular do? So question here, the response for conversation is cities as policy laboratories. Many cities and metropolitan regions around the world are taking action on climate, even in the absence of national policies and commitments, not only out of the recognition of cities' contributions to and risks from climate change, but also of the opportunities to lower the potential trade-offs between economic growth and environmental, and I would add welfare,
Sure.
quality of life priorities. Yeah. And she notes that large cities with landmark policies currently include Seoul, Stockholm, Toronto, Copenhagen, New York, London, and Tokyo, and mid-size and smaller cities have also created some innovative climate
policies. Yeah. So, okay, so there's a few responses. It's all very true, okay, and it's a good observation. If we go back and look at the C40, one of the reasons that the C40 was created was to band together some of the major cities who are trying to look at climate change and help support each other in decision-making, policy-making to help the climate crisis. So absolutely. And whoa, that hurt.
Yes,
Ouch.
I can't figure out how to turn it off on all
That's
my.
okay. No, it's okay.
Mini
I do the same. I got the same problem sometimes, Laura, too. So no problem. So there, our future and our failure. So a city is not just a city. Is not just a city. It comes back to culture and expectations, right? And like if you're in Hong Kong, I mean, I lived in Hong Kong for a while, and there you have a family of four, perhaps living in what most Midwestern Americans would consider a closet, right? Because the cultural expectation within Hong Kong, where space is an absolute premium, is quite different than if you're in the Midwest United States or middle of Canada, where you expect to have a 3-car garage that's barely big enough, right? And I think this, so if you have to remember that these cultural expectations are profound, and we very often forget that this has a systemic impact on both on the laws, but on then how one lives and what one does. Okay, so that's really crucial, and we can't just transfer X to Y, but we can look at the context and think about how can we innovate into something. And I'll give you something. I went to Tokyo, oh gosh, this is now almost 20 years ago, and was sitting there with the mayor and the city organizers on behalf of Arab, and we're talking about one thing. And they said one of the things that they were doing was looking at the city, the government buying up buildings to tear them down to create pocket parks for the elderly, because they know, and research shows, that access to green space has a profound impact on your mental and physical health, right? And Tokyo at that moment was having a bit of a real estate bubble. And so the government said, well, if we can buy some of these buildings, which are starting to get past their prime, and create parks, we're doing two things. We're helping the real estate market, but we're also providing our citizens with access to what will be critical for their future. And I thought that is systemic thinking, right? Because it's looking at how can we take these different elements in our puzzle and solve more than one challenge which we have simultaneously. And now that's not transferable to New York City, right? Because of the social environment, the me culture, right? Compared to the we culture. And so this is what I mean by culture matters a lot when we look, especially when it comes to cities, and how one deals with some of these different issues. And I think that's really great. Now, do multinationals care about cities? Yes, because cities are also in a war for talent. You have no idea what cities will do to win like the Lee Kuan Yew Global Cities Award, or why they vie to be at the top of the Livable City Index. The same thing with all rankings, for universities, for best place to work. If you are a citizen, you're looking to place a new office someplace. You look at the rankings. Right, and say, oh, do you want to put it in blank or blank? Well, this city's on its way up and that city is clearly on its way down. Right. So this is where then this idea of policy comes in and matters a lot. And multinationals care because at the end of the day, they're part of that system. They want their citizens, their workers to be happy. And if they're in a place like, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, that's where I grew up. And when I left Cincinnati in 1979, it was a city that was in bustling and it became one in decline. And now it's on its way back up. My 23-year-old daughter moved back because she said it's one of the top 10 hottest cities in Ohio, in the United States right now for young people. I'm like, whoa, okay. And I went there and I was like, cool. I said, would I open an office in Cincinnati today? Absolutely. Would I have 20 years ago? No way. All right. So that's, I don't know if that's, again.
What are some tools or ways of thinking to track that, some of those, that map of contexts, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Is it simply having the luxury of a team that studies Tokyo versus Cincinnati? I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Laura. And to see, I don't think we should want to get into a dialogue around what cities are going up, which are going down. And this is all also very often dependent upon the whims of a government, and stability of a government. You could think one day it's all going great and all of a sudden, it kind of goes poof, right? So what I'm always quite intrigued by are demographic profiles. And demographic profiles will very often tell you about the future success or failure of any place, right? If you have a healthy profile versus an unhealthy, called a coffin shape, where you got lots of olders, where you got the big bell shape, lots of youngers, then you can kind of see if that place has a real positive or negative future.
So I have this image of anthropologists in maybe being attached to research teams, but I'm not seeing them in the board.
Oh, no, I actually totally think that anthropologists should be much more involved with decision making and dialogues. And I'm not an anthropologist, but I've worked with many, and I'm a huge fan of integrated teams, like anthropologists and systems biologists being together in hardcore engineering or economists, because a systems biologist or anthropologist, they're trained to look at the whole picture. Right? And
why is that so rare? And how can we, in these kinds of dialogues, influence? What will make the companies that have these resources and pressures, and maybe the opening, to help them understand that it will help them do better in business. It will help them do better in whatever role they choose to have in the world, right? Yep. How do we break out of it being all folks talking just one of the E's, right?
Okay, so there's two parts to that, to me, in my answer. One is the push and the pull. So one thing I've learned one thing that took me a while to learn was how, in traveling to all of these offices all over the world, to actually truly listen. Deep listening. Mm-hmm. There's listening, there's this shallow listening where you kind of go, yeah, I know that. And there's deep listening, so you're saying, not just listening to what's being said, but how it's being said. And so all of a sudden when someone's really listening to you, mm-hmm. and to stop and suspend all judgment, to suspend all assessment and listen. And if you don't understand something, to ask. And someone says, well, that rose was red, and just say, well, actually, what kind of red was it? You know, and I go, oh, well, it was a very deep red. And so you actually are, so you go beyond the skimming the surface. You're trying to understand behind. It's like, okay, there's a 5 times why or 5 times what. This is one of your techniques you're asking for before. To me, 5 times why or 5 times what is something which is always need to do. So I guess almost doing on you, saying, okay, what do you really want? What do you really want? What do you really want? Why do you want it? Why do you want it? You know, and this to me is a tried and true thing, but it's this deep listening which allows one to understand what the other group needs to hear. So in multinationals, you have to learn not to say what you want to say, but you need to say what they need to hear, right? And you need to be able to speak with the other group in a way that they can be open to hearing it, not necessarily what they want to hear, but how they can receive it. And this I learned as, because I studied both engineering and architecture, the engineering first and architecture second. And you talk to an engineer about a steel bridge, and what he or she sees. You talk to an architect about a steel bridge and what he or she sees, and you'll think you're talking about 2 completely different bridges, because the words they use are different. And this is what I mean about this language matters. In the boardroom, in the multinationals, you have to think what matters to that group and how can I help them understand what they need to understand in a way which they're open and able to receive it. If all they understand is a language of numbers, then I have to make the effort to understand the kinds of numbers they need to hear and how I need to frame it. If they're only thinking about social impact, then I need to be able to think about social impact. If all they care about is climate, then I need to be able to talk about that. And this was my lesson. It's sort of like being a chameleon. You're still the same animal, but you're able to communicate in a way which opens the other side's eyes, right? So you don't compromise on what you're not compromising. You're saying, how can I be more effective in helping them to create the connection points? Rather than me slamming, I'm building trust. I'm building a true relationship at that moment, which is then meaningful, that allows them to make the jump, right? But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get your partner in conversation to click and to commit to something. That's how I look at that.
So back to the concept of interdisciplinary points of view, however it's structured, right? Whether it's formally assembling an interdisciplinary team or bringing in interdisciplinary experts for research or roundtable, however that is enacted within a particular environment. What are some lessons learned that you've had of attempting to do that? Right? It's not easy to corral a bunch of different ways of looking at the bridge.
Yeah.
So what are some facilitation or even recruiting or management of that you've seen? You know, what are some stories of that?
Yeah. So, well, I'll give you one thing I think is really important whenever we're working on that. Somehow there has to be an agreement around the goal. Right. And then, and then one can begin to talk about how you're getting to the goal and what one can contribute. And so usually when I'm doing that, I refuse, so when I have a meeting around that, I refuse to let anyone put a name tag. I have name tags with a name tag with their function. Right? Because as soon as you put a function and say, hi, I'm Chris from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. As soon as you get a label, you get put into a box, and then mentally you go into your box. Because then you all of a sudden have to represent that institution. I always find if you bring everybody in with their name, and use your first name, even in cultures where it's not you're supposed to. I always use the first name and nothing else. And I don't let anyone introduce themselves by their company or their role or what their expertise is, because quite frankly, Laura, you could have a wonderful idea that has to do with a bridge. Even though you're not a bridge designer,
Right.
it doesn't matter, because if we're trying to look at a problem, we're trying to think about something, everybody has something to contribute. And again, if you label everybody, boom. And so that's one thing I always do, is just you never let someone introduce themselves by their qualification. I don't like that at all, right? The second thing is, if you think about the goal, I always like to think, okay, what, again, there's 5 times why. Why is this a goal? Is this really, let's be clear, until we're almost painfully clear of where we're trying to go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then you write that down. And then by the end of the day, you need to check that again. Right. And again, because typically what you start with is not what you end with. Because everyone has total clarity that we want to get to the top of that mountain today. This is the goal, top of the mountain. At the end of the day, you're only at the first little hill. You made it to the first hut. You say, yeah, not bad. How we got to the hut? It's not a failure, it's a success. And the question is, so are we still trying to get to the top of this mountain? Is this really where we need to go? What about that valley over there? You know, are we sure this is right? So you have to really always, to me, there's always this just why. Right? And be agile enough to accept that the goal you started with is not necessarily the goal you're going to end with.
So that's a good example of many companies, many large organizations have experimented with or been exposed to design thinking as it has rolled out culturally and spawned lots of consultancy. But who actually walks the talk? Who continually, have you seen anybody continually reframe? And I mean, it's natural to, we figured out a solution, we brainstormed, we brought people together, it felt so good. But do they keep asking? Have you seen any entity? I have not, right? I've seen lots of folks really enjoy short-term highs of that feeling, but I haven't seen it lived and breathed within an environment that has commercial consequences or cost consequences to continually reframing the problem.
I mean, so I'll say yes, it's not very often, but I think if you go through a process where you're doing, very often, again, you're not gonna like this, but there's some scenarios where you come in, like we did a project in Australia with a city's water company that was thinking either being privatized or semi-privatized, or trying to figure out what their role was in this system. Right? They thought they were the water. And what we started with, what we ended with were 2 completely different viewpoints. Right. And so, because I think it's actually okay to come in with the preconceived notions of, right? I think it's okay. Because part of the role of systems thinking is to challenge your preconceptions. But the crucial thing is you have to lay down the law at the very beginning, saying that you need to be ready to challenge your preconceived notions of what is and what will be. That is a crucial thing. And most people do those nod their heads, yeah, I'm ready. And then you need to do a few little exercises. So they kind of go, oh, that's what you mean. Okay, I'm uncomfortable now, you know.
Right.
And then, you know, so, and this is with this water company, we did that. And they did change their mind.
Sorry, I didn't mean to step over you, Chris. I'm going to read out a comment that Manon posted. What do you think of the following statement? Pulitzer Prize winning writer Thomas Friedman argues that any company that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's strategies for building resilience and propulsion when the climate changes will thrive in this age of acceleration?
Great question. First of all, Tom Friedman's writings and Tom Friedman's opinions and mine, I think, overlap about half the time. Right? So don't always agree with him. In this case, I agree with him 100%. Okay. And I think that we have too long had this idea that we're here to conquer nature. And, you know, nature, Mother Nature is one of the best systems integrators that has ever existed. And the more we look at how nature and natural solutions, nature-based solutions function, truly function, the better off we will all be. Okay. Now, I'm a child of the 60s, I admit, and I remember the fascination of the late 60s, early 70s with, you know, nature and the patterns of nature and looking at. And then we sort of went the other way, trying to conquer in science. And to me, the next iteration has to be the marriage of these two, or the cohabitation of these two. If you believe or don't believe in the institution of marriage, you can pick whatever, but it's actually the melding of these two, of really heavy, high science, really strong science, and really deep nature. And I think whoever sorts this out and follows that inspiration is truly going to be the winner and the successful, you know, and I really do believe this 100%, because there's so many things. The more we understand, for example, about our bodies, the more we understand about the more we learn about our bodies, the less we truly understand how things really work. And we talked, or chemicals. Why do certain chemicals work on certain populations and not others? They're still trying to figure it out. I mean, this is in the state of nature. How do plants create energy? You know,
So
solve that one.
That's a great hearkening back to the small window of attention span that we have right now. Things like a pandemic. But even before that, we are coming into an era of at least awareness of globalized pros and cons, right? And quality of life and the ripple effect. And it's made an opening, a receptiveness again to the ideas of folks like Bucky Fuller and Fritjof Capra and others who talk, and Mansour Vakili, and folks talking about living systems and us all being a part of it, and the sacred geometry, if you will, of nature. And what does that mean? The fractal approach and all of those things. So how do you see that? You were saying, speak to the language of the audience, of the what is the language that companies and transnational organizations, from the UN to an Arab to Nestle, how can they hear it? How can they pull that in?
My answer is it depends. It depends.
Yes, okay, but all right.
Depends on the context. Yeah.
Okay, so give me some ways to talk to. All right, if I get that meeting, how do I prep? How do I know? I'm not them. I don't know them.
Okay, so no, it's legit. That's a legitimate ask, Laura. I'm not making fun of the question at all. I mean, and no. I'm seriously not. I think it's a really legitimate question, and it takes preparation, right, to understand who's going to be in the room, what languages do they understand, and this isn't whether it's French or Spanish or Swahili. It's, you know, are they going to be concerned about citizen welfare? Are they mostly concerned about the base of the pyramid? Are they concerned about housing? Are they concerned about profit? Are they concerned about employee happiness, employee motivation? Are they concerned about carbon mitigation? For me, the question really is what is it that this group, what is it that will motivate this group? Now, and I'm going to change that word a little bit from motivate this group to what will move this group. Mm-hmm. And we all have our heads and our hearts and our soul, our mind of our bodies and our soul. The best arguments and the best dialogues touch all of those. Mm. Right. And I think all of us know, some people call it when you're in the flow, when all these you've been in, I know you've listened, you've been in a place, and all of a sudden, in a moment where you kind of go, whoa, wow, that's right. And it doesn't happen in the boardroom all that often, right? But sometimes it does when you really are sitting there going, that's right. And so I always like to try to think of the mind, body, and soul as this trilogy. And usually meetings are only focused on the mind, mm-hmm. Right? Usually. But I think if you can figure out what it means to activate all three in that moment. Right? And so one of the things that I find when we're looking at these systems is I try to think about the next generations and try to usually talk about what the next generations will be expecting or hoping for. And mm-hmm. I have a couple colleagues in New Zealand who took me I had the privilege of a conversation with some elders, some Maori elders, and it was so interesting to ask them how they make their decisions. And they ask, what would 7 generations ago, what would our elders 7 generations back think of this decision, and what would our ancestors 7 generations forward think of this decision? So they try to span 14 generations as they're considering what that decision should be. Now, you can kind of go, yeah, I can't even think of 14 weeks or 14 days because I got a report due. I'm not going to think, forget that. So again, this is context. Right? This is context. And how can we expand context to incorporate responsibility? And this responsibility not just for contemporary, but for future generations, for future actions, right? And this is where the multinationals can sometimes, this is where the multinationals can be very powerful, because they can, when they're working well, have programs, because one part of the world might be a money generator or the other part's not doing so well, they can actually spread some of that thinking and they have a little bit of stability. As I know at our company there, because we were in so many parts of the world, there was a certain financial stability which allowed us to have conversations which you couldn't have if you were worried about quarterly returnings in a very small company. Because there you're just trying to survive. And that's the difference between you're able to, support and keep going.
So here's another question. How can we get for-profit multinationals more involved in scientific research related to identifying and solving global challenges like health and the environment?
How can we get for-profit multinationals? So I think.
So there are these huge talent pools that a multinational has to put together, including their feeder systems of consultants and local experts, right? How that, back to knowledge transfer that you referenced at the top, one of the things that I'm sort of awed by the immensity and complexity of a multinational just to do their job, sell their product, do their thing. But I don't see much transfer of that.
Yeah. Okay. So, right. So the first answer I'm going to give you is local. Mm-hmm. Right. Multinationals. So, it's a for-profit multinationals, 4 words. But at the end of the day, you're talking about people who work in a place.
Okay.
right? So, like, I'll give you an example. I was head of research at Arup for a while, and most every university wanted to work with us because we're, at that point in time, we're the number one consultancy in city building in the world. So people would always want to talk to me and try to pitch to me. And I'd always ask them, I said, so why should I work with you? Why? Oh, because we've got the best faculty in the world. I said, well, every university tells me that. Well, we're multidisciplinary. We got this. I said, yeah, so what? And I said, the only thing you have, this is to one university in London, I said, the only advantage you have is you're 2 blocks away from my office. That's it. There's no other advantage. So you come and tell me how we can take advantage of that, then we can start doing work together. Right. And to me, this is, and you can say, oh, that was arrogant, that was mean, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I'll give it was a little bit, but it was very true. Because, it's very true. And so this is where, to me, you have to think of what is the advantage that you bring to that company where you are. And truly think about that. Is it, because it's not just the fact that it's for profit. So they have to produce, is it producing products? As if you mentioned, Laura, is it because you get great staff that you can then that company no longer has to have a research arm because you can integrate. So there's all sorts of ways in which there can be this collaboration, but you have to think very clearly about what it is you can bring to them to help do that. Now, the second part of your question is identifying and solving global challenges. So again, these challenges end up being very local. And there's so many things which are already there. To me, I was on an advisory council for the EU at one point, and I made myself extremely unpopular with this group, saying, I want you to stop funding research for 2 years. Just stop. No more research calls. All it is now is how we implement, how we prototype and implement, because we have so many solutions which are so much better than what's being done every day. I think the research has to be in getting it on the ground, making it happen. So I mean, changing some laws, changing incentives, right? Making tougher targets, right? So sometimes it's now obviously that didn't happen because the research was still funded and, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes I really think we have to remember that there's an awful lot of great intellect which is already there. And you say identifying the challenges, an awful lot of things that are already identified.
You've circled around the fact that, and certainly to an academic-centric audience like Polyplexus certainly is by there's an intellectual a decision to figure it out, right? To understand, to figure it out, to think it out. But that you're right, the best practices of how is mind, body, soul brought into it without everybody being.
So this is where, okay, now this is Chris's opinion. This is not an ETH Switzerland opinion. This is my personal opinion. This is the caveat. Very often it's my observation that one of the biggest differences between practice when I was heading up research and development at Arup and academic world at MIT is we would spend at R&D and at Arup, we would spend probably half a day trying to figure out who's already done this in a way which we can almost use, right? And academia trying to figure out who's never done something. It wasn't really, it's a very different mindset about you don't, we wanted something which was just good enough, frankly, right? Not trying to, split another hair. And unfortunately, the process in academia is all about splitting hairs, not just good enough, which is fine too. I mean, this is just it's a different motivation structure. All
All right. So you have the soapbox to a research community. What would you, other than, what else would you challenge them to either think about looking into, or their own assumptions?
So yeah. So one thing I think is really, really important would be look within wherever you are, your communities where you are, and are you active in trying to implement some of the solutions at a very, very local level at your local elementary school, are you involved with this? How involved are you with thinking about the future of your own community? And I know, and this is be involved with it. Help make sure that, because all of us are hypocrites. And how can we, I love blueberries, and I know they're good for my brain. And here in Switzerland, in the middle of winter, there are not many blueberry bushes which are blooming. We're providing fruit, so I kind of look at it, and they come from Peru. So and about 6 times out of 7, I look at that little container of blueberries and I put it back, saying I cannot justify, because the carbon is not included in this price. I can't buy it. And then about maybe 1 time out of 7, 1 time out of 10, I will buy it. And therefore I am a hypocrite, right? So the question then I say is, so how can we truly move into that domain? The second thing, I think we need to have a much, much, much better accounting of the total environmental impact of all of our products and services and processes. So true life costing is still a massive challenge. Lots of work. I mean, gosh, in the past 20 years, massive work has been coming, but this is a systems question. We still don't have environmental impact labels. We have sugar, we have fat, but we don't have embodied carbon, embodied water, right? So that's a massive one.
Big hairy problem. A lot of folks with self-interest who want to take be those standards. It's very challenging. Which ties right into something that was asked earlier, which is, how do we systematically evaluate and scale progress that is locally originated? What is working? How do you take, how do you get the word out? What is that knowledge transfer from local to other local?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a tough one, really tough one to answer in a meaningful way that the person who's asking is going to be happy with. In a way, one has to make the effort to broadcast it, right? You have to almost make the effort, right? And this is like, okay, well, why is that? Why can't we have discovery? So there's initiatives like Paul Hawkins' Drawdown, or Bruno Gussani and Ted's Countdown, which is trying, and there's Verge and Green Biz in California. There are many groups who are trying to highlight instances. And the number of solutions which exist already in the world are in the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, but they're just by some indigenous groups in the Amazon, and they've solved some stuff that we need. We don't even know we need it. So I can't answer that, my friend. That's a great question, and I don't know. Don't have a good one for that one.
It's dismaying that we can make viral memes out of what some pseudo celebrity wears, but we can't make a meme out of. It's happening in little bits and pieces, but it's very uneven. I don't have the solution either, and I think one of the things is for scientists to put themselves out of their siloed comfort zone and talk to folks in other silos, right? And that's why they're here on Polyplexus, because they have that. At least.
Well, but this is, very often one didn't go into there are very few marketing experts who went into science. Usually, because That's what we find a niche, which is kind of fits our lifestyles, our personality styles. But I think, Laura, you've hit the proverbial whatever on the head, the nail or whatever you want to call it, is to first of all be open for the dialogue, and the second to search it out. Right, to make the time to listen and not assume that we have all the answers ourselves, to know that we don't, because the challenges which we're facing now require these kinds of conversations, which we just didn't really have. And I think this is this next iteration. So systems thinking kind of goes through and goes through. But now I think it's a time where we're ready again. And our tools, our computational tools, what we can do is just profound. And to be able to use these tools in a stronger dialogue for interaction and understanding and building an understanding, it's just, now's the time to do this,
Yeah, we have a chance to exploit this new plateau. And if we don't, shame on us as a species.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, true,
well, that's a great way to wrap up, Chris. Thank you so much, my dear friend, for your generosity and your thinking, both professional and personal. I really appreciate it.
Well, Laura, thank you for your passion and for continuing to push this kind of thinking. And I mean this sincerely, we need it. And I hope your members and your participants on Polyplexus also get inspired by what you're doing. It inspires me. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Chris. More
no problem. Talk to you soon. Ciao, ciao.